Welcome, my friend, to Next Level Change Success. I'm Therese Perez, a change strategist and practitioner with over 20 years of experience designing and delivering impactful change programs across various industries. In this podcast, I share real-world practical strategies to help you create and deliver positive change experiences, whether you're a leader, practitioner, or someone looking to bring new ways of working to life. In today's fast-paced world, change is constant. Here we focus on how you can put people at the centre of your change strategy, because people with a sense of purpose are the most important link in driving performance. So if you're ready to create meaningful change and achieve all the success that comes with it, keep listening. Together, let's change the conversation and take it to the next level. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Next Level Change Success. My name is Therese Perez, and I'm the founder of myvirtualchangemanager.com. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm recording on Tharawal country today and pay my respects to the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which I am recording, to elders both past, present, and emerging. So today I want to talk about bias. This is an episode that I've really been looking forward to recording because I think it's really relevant in raising your self-awareness in the world of change and change management, change strategy, change implementation is a way that people can really step into doing change, affecting change, leading change in a far better way through becoming more aware of our own belief systems, and bias sits in there as well. And so when we talk about bias, just to give a bit of a definition, it's the cause to feel or show inclination or prejudice against or for something or someone. And if you think about from a perspective, this is the way I consider and reflect upon my own personal bias. And I certainly have personal biases that I'm aware of. Some work in my favour. Some I'm happy to have the views about the world, because you need to have views about this world. You do need to have areas that you're fluid in and others that you're very clear on. From a personal perspective, I'm sure you have the same way and same mode of thinking. If you're someone who does like to reflect and grow, and I have said before, I'm a continuous learner, and that's definitely how I approach life. I will learn more about myself through the experiences that I have, and bias sits in there as well. I will become aware of personal bias more and more through the experiences that I have, and then I can reflect upon whether I'm comfortable in that bias or whether it's something that I should shift because it's inhibiting me in getting the outcomes that I want in life, or it might be also inhibiting others to fulfill their potential as well. When I talk about personal bias, I think it's really relevant if you're a leader in an organization. So if you're leading a team, this is definitely an area you should explore. And if you're a change manager, change practitioner, change influencer, a change leader, then your own personal bias could be limiting your ability to get the results that you want, because you may be undermining your own personal potential, and you may be also undermining others. And this is definitely something when it comes to neurodivergence and diversity of thought and working with people who don't think the way that you do, may not look the way that you do. This is where personal bias becomes very apparent. And you can see it in teams, in organizations where people all look the same. When there is a lack of diversity, you can absolutely know straight away, you know that the leader is potentially ignorant of their own personal bias. I remember, and I think I've mentioned this in another podcast episode, seeing a team, they were the strategy team in an organization, and they all look like Harvard prep boys. That may not have been the case, but they all dress the same. They all seem to think the same. And it was all male at that moment in time. Even though there were women in the team, they weren't there at that particular forum. So it definitely also elicited some bias from myself and probably some assumptions that I made about those individuals, because this is how our world works, because we're always operating on belief systems, and the belief systems are the things that create personal bias in both a positive and a negative way. And I would say it's also the same when you see a range of teams where there might be predominantly females. when there isn't actually any male in that team and all the females look all the same. It's the same thing. It's just working from a place of bias for individuals. And I touched on it, but it's important let's explore it more about belief systems. Belief systems drive bias. So if you have a certain belief about a certain role in an organization, a certain industry, a certain gender, all of those belief systems create this kaleidoscope of the world in which you see your reality. And that encompasses personal bias that you might have. So how does personal bias actually inhibit change? Well, it may mean that you have very strong beliefs about people's ability to change. You might have a certain belief system about a particular type of change and whether that's the right change or the wrong change. And I hear this and see this in even the tech landscape. People currently are expressing a bias which is pro-AI or negative on AI and AI usage. And that inability for some to reflect upon whether what they're basing their belief system on is fact or fiction. And people tend to, when it comes to looking at something, will look to seek out voices that justify their position and data that justifies their position. Others who might take an alternative view will be doing exactly the same because that makes us feel comfortable. The sweet spot when it comes to bias is being willing to hold a view, but also be willing to have that view challenged. Even more importantly is that you would hold a view and welcome the challenge and invite people who don't think like you, who may not look like you, who may not sound like you, to explore that belief for you, to give you alternative views. And that's where, if you've created a team which has diversity, that you can get diversity of thought at the table and exploration, and therefore, as a result, actually become aware of a bias that you may not have realized that you had, and then be able to step into a space of reflecting and shifting your mindset about something. Let's take this a step further about the benefits of this. If you have a lot of data that you see, and I think one of the benefits of having new people come into an organization, so I'm one of the biggest advocates about retention and development of people versus having to have huge turnover. But there is also benefits to natural attrition, having people explore other opportunities, leave the team, go to other teams or other organizations, and having people from another organization come into your space to see things with fresh eyes, have new ideas, have new suggestions. And sometimes it's about how open you are at that point for that feedback and input, and how centered you are and confident in yourself that you might be, let's just say, wrong in your belief system that's driving a certain bias. You may not even be aware of the fact that you had been on autopilot thinking about a certain aspect of your business or of your team or of your change. And that is the beauty of having someone new at the table. So inviting others to provide feedback and input, even other teams who aren't in your subject matter expertise or that area, just gives you the chance to kick something around, to test and challenge yourself as to whether there's something that they're seeing that you're not. And one of the things in the leadership space, I've talked about how you could be employing the same type of people and not really know it. And when you're seeing a CV or a resume, you might have some personal bias when you see a certain name or you see a certain, what you interpret as an ethnicity. It's such a hard word to say. But just understanding that can, in and of itself, be a bias that you may be aware of or not aware of. The things that you can do to challenge yourself is to say, well, I tell you what, I'm going to have my top 2 selections, and then I'm going to have a wild card, and I'm actually going to get someone else who's not in my area to review these resumes for this job, and then suggest another wild card to actually go ahead and interview. And you might be surprised when the people who work and have that core specialization may not be as enthusiastic or as new or as fresh thinking as someone who's on the cusp of it and need development. So these are the things that you can do to challenge yourself. If I had a report and the way I'm thinking, or if I'm thinking about introducing a new process, it is worth getting someone else from another area to suggest other ways in which that can be done. You would be very surprised, or not at all surprised, that many people are quite attached to the change approach that they want to take for something, because this has worked at this other organization. I did this and it worked really well. And then they invite a change manager to come and work on their project to implement it into organization Y. And when the change person comes up with, these are the activities I do, then you might have a subject matter expert saying, no, that didn't work in my other organization. This is why, and this is why I want to do it this way here, because I want to do the same thing. And that can be really difficult for a change person who's been employed to actually bring the expertise into the realm for this change in this organization at this time. And so if you're very attached to things having to be your way, then they're going to be stifled during that process. And it's not uncommon at all that this happens in organizations. So be aware of that, is that through the bias or attachment that you have to be not only right, but to do it your way, that you could be stifling the very thing that is going to make the difference when it comes to your change. The other thing that people probably, and you might need to be aware of, is that people can show up differently in different rooms. So if you're in a room with an executive, you can be very different to when you're in a room with your peer group or in a room with your team members. I tend not to flex too much, I would think, in the environments, and I always like to get that reflection that everyone sees me the same. But there could be an interpretation or a bias that has other people see you differently. There could also be a bias where other people behave differently when you're in the room, especially if you're a leader. It is certainly an art as a leader to understand and acknowledge that your shadow looms large when you're a leader in an organization, that your reputation could also loom large if you're a person who's quite vocal or who likes to add value, and it can loom large in a really, really positive way, or maybe in a not so positive way. And being able to filter. So it's kind of like having that kaleidoscope of beliefs in which you view the world, but also understanding that everyone else has their own kaleidoscopes, and then they kind of come together. Some match and some are perfectly mismatched. Some may change, and I've had this in the past as I've had my leadership journey grow and my understanding of what it is to be a leader, and also being very particular about who do I want to show up as a person, but also as a leader, and understanding that people can put on a bit of a mask to you. And so you might have no issues with people, like with certain people who you work with, but then you hear that your team members are having issues with that person. And it's worth exploring and not just dismissing that because, well, I haven't had that experience. And the reason I say that is because, you haven't had the experience because you're in a position of authority or perceived authority. But when your team go in and have those conversations, they're copying it. So therefore, you as a leader or someone who has some sort of power in this equation should also be considering that what that team member's telling you is the truth, and that you need to go and explore it further. And that you might need to have an uncomfortable conversation with your stakeholder if they're not treating your team members as they should be, with the respect of any team member in an organization. So bias isn't just part of what drives you, it's also the perception that people might have of you, and it's also the relationships that people have and interactions they have with each other. Bias can also be created through past experience, and it could be, I had this experience with this type of team in my old organisation, and then when you come through and you're working in this new organisation, you could carry that bias with you. And it's really important to, at all times, just step back and do the concept of a hypothetical, like of, I have a hypothesis about this, but let's see what it's like here. Let me understand more about this organisation, but here's my hypothesis, but can we get some data on that? And hopefully some unbiased data. You have to really challenge yourself and even the teams who do the reporting on the source of the data, what's the timing of it, and really unpack it to see if you can trust it or if it can give you the insights that you need to make decisions going forward. It's one of the biggest challenges from a change perspective as well, from a bias perspective, is if you're going from a non-data driven organization to then getting reporting up and running, getting knowledge management up and running, where it's not just based on what people have in their heads. It's actually some data that can be provided, which might tell a completely different story. Now, if you had a bias in relation to the interpretation of that, you're not going to get the value that you could from exploring that data more. You might be quite shocked, in fact, by some of the things that come out from a data perspective that people just thought was just the same as they'd always thought, and so they always provide the same insights. It's like, see how things always slow down here, see where the wastage is in this process. It's always been there, versus when the data gets put on the table and you start to realize there are other pain points which are more important. And so part of it is framing for people and softening that attachment to the bias that they have and calling it and naming it if that is the case, especially around measures and reporting that you might provide to the table. You'd be really surprised at how much, or maybe not, how much people get attached to certain data points and will challenge to the nth degree about that specific number and how that was calculated, versus seeing the wood from the trees and taking that helicopter view of, yeah, maybe we were chopping down the wrong forest here because this data is saying this, and that seems really surprising to me. So personal bias can be stifling your change, your ability to change, your organization, your people. You may not be optimizing at all in your organization or your team or on your project through personal bias really driving things. But you can't hit bias head on. So a lot of the time is you can say, well, maybe we have a bias to action. I like this concept of bias to action because it's like we want to get things done. And one of the things to challenge with a bias to action is that, what about a bias to effectiveness? What about a bias to efficiency? Because action without that thought around efficiency can be just chaos, because there's nothing around accountability or efficiency. So rather than a bias to action, maybe we should replace it with a bias to effectiveness and efficiency. So a couple of things to think about. Thought I wanted to really tackle this. I think it's really relevant for where we're at the moment. And I think it's just about possibility, sitting with possibility that you may have your own personal bias reflected back to you, and that you could sit with it, or you could propel forward with it, or you could see the opportunity in reflecting on it and potentially choosing a different belief, choosing a different way of looking at things. So you might want to think about that, or not. Do what you always did, get what you always got, or potentially reflect on things where you may want to take a different view of the world. You may want to reframe your experience and your prior experience to be something where you're just learning more about a topic, and so that you can ask the right questions. And that's why the power of questioning is so beneficial, to test thought processes, hypotheses, and personal bias at all times to get the best outcomes for everyone involved. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you got some value from it. And come to my virtualchangemanager.com. I'm doing a bit of spring cleaning. It's that time of year on my website, as well as on my tools and courses, doing some retrospective, doing some reflecting activities myself around the direction of my virtualchangemanager.com, because that's what evolution's all about, is exploring new ways of doing things. So if you're interested in keeping in touch, upskilling around change management, change leadership, how to influence for change, how to handle everyday change, how to deal with culture change, come to my virtualchangemanager.com, sign up to our newsletter, stay in touch. I'm very excited about a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes. And I hope you have a wonderful day. And just remember that change matters, because your people and you matter.